Hello everyone, my name is Havian and today I'll be talking to you about the PC version of Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet. And wow, I've had a busy time gaming over the last week. The English version of Fatal Bullet finally released. I took a trip down to Bandai Namco to try out Soul Calibur 6, Ni no Kuni 2, Little Witch Academia, the new Gundam game, and I've been trying out the English version of Soul Worker that's finally in open beta. So hopefully if I have time I'll be making videos for all of those as well. But the one thing that I spent the most time on was the PC version of Fatal Bullet. And boy, do I have some things to say. I'm sure most people were relieved to find out that the PC aiming controls actually work properly on the mouse, for the most part. One thing they need to fix is the aim assist on mouse. I don't mean the bullet frame, I mean the mouse actually has aim assist when you right click. You can use it to your advantage with certain weapons, but for others it just gets in the way and keeps you locked onto certain locations when you don't want it to. It's fine for controllers, but that kind of aim assist isn't really needed on a mouse. And that's not all. There's another serious issue with mouse that's currently stopping some people from playing the game. There's a bug that stops you looking up and down with your mouse. The only directions you're able to view are left and right of your character. When you're having issues like this in a game where mouse controls are needed for aiming, that's a big problem. I'm not sure if Dimps or Bandai Namco have addressed this yet, or if a patch for it is in the works, but a lot of people did tell me that they had this issue on the PC version as soon as it went live during my stream. So hopefully this is something that gets fixed as soon as possible. Personally, I haven't run into any of the major issues that other people have been having. For the most part, the game runs fine for me, apart from a few stutters here and there and maybe a crash. But we don't need to go into details about that. The first thing I noticed when I started playing the PC version was the partial mouse support for the menus. For the most part, you can use the arrow keys or WASD to navigate the menus, and you can use the left click to confirm and the right click to cancel. At first I actually hated it, but after a little bit of time I managed to navigate most things faster than I could on controller. But there are still a few things on the menu that are going to be easier to do on a pad. I'm not sure if anyone kept the default key bindings, but for me they're not the best at all. It felt like they overlooked some of the controller specific shortcuts and left them in for the keyboard and mouse settings. I'm not sure if this specific issue happens to anyone else, but 2 on the keyboard is a shortcut to one of your skills in the game. That's fine, but it's also one of the shortcuts for the emote and quick chat menu, and I'm sure you can see where this is going. When you hold 2 and push A at the same time, it opens up the emote menu, and when you hold 2 and push S, it opens up the quick chat menu. So if you're running to the left or stepping back while holding down the skill that is bound to 2, it can open one of those menus. The menu kept popping open for me in the middle of combat and I couldn't figure out why. All the other buttons worked fine, but once I figured out what the problem was, I had to make sure that that skill button was bound to something else. Another keybind that I wasn't a fan of was evade being bound to F. When using the sword, it felt a little too close to the other movement keys for me. So I put evade onto shift, since shift is usually the sprint button, and evade makes you go into a sprint anyway, so it made more sense to have it there. I just moved the normal sprint button onto another button, since I only really use the default sprint when I'm inside of town. Another thing I should mention, which might be a bit confusing after what I just said, is the default placement of the shift button, which is bound to V. And when I say shift button, I don't mean the shift key on the keyboard. In Fatal Bullet, the shift button is usually held down on controllers to activate your skills, but since the keyboard has skill shortcuts on 1 to 4, shift is not really used for the same reason as the controller. On its own, it's not really too important when playing with a keyboard and mouse, but once you learn weapon arts, that changes. I'm not sure if they added a dedicated button that activates your weapon arts. I tried to find one and I couldn't see a thing, but the game will tell you that you need to hold shift, which is bound to V, and press the UFG button, which is bound to middle mouse. Pressing V and middle mouse in the middle of combat isn't the quickest thing to do, so if you feel like the default button is getting in your way as well, then rebind those keys to something else. I spent a while playing the console versions with a controller, but I didn't really notice the viewing angle limits. When playing with a mouse, these limits became much more obvious when you're fighting some of the enemies that move fast and fly above your head. There's a limit to how far up you can look, so these enemies can easily fly out of your view, and you won't be able to hit them unless you move away and get into a position where they're easier to target. Sometimes this is easy, but there are times where those enemies will be focused on you, and they'll stay close to you while you're trying to get into a better position. And that kind of makes it impossible for you to aim at them while they're directly above your head and you can't actually aim that high. And it's not just the flying enemies that made me notice things while playing on the PC. It felt like the game was actually easier overall when playing on consoles. I thought I was going crazy when some of the enemies felt like they were acting different or moving faster than they were on a console version. So I fought the same enemy on PS4, then on PC at 30 FPS, and then again at 60 FPS. And the enemy seemed like it was moving much faster and acting differently on the PC than it did on console. On PC, some enemies just sprint across the map so fast that they're out of shooting range by the time that they stop. On the console, I didn't notice this happen at all, but when playing on the PC at 60 FPS, I saw it far more often. You can switch the FPS on PC, but the only settings I saw available were 30 FPS or a 60 FPS lock. You might be able to find a way to get around those locks, but do so at your own risk. And I bet at this point you're probably wondering if I even like the PC version of the game. And honestly, I actually do. After setting up the keybinds and options to work in a way that was smooth for me to play, and now that I'm paying attention to the story, usually I'm not one to pay attention to the story in the Sword Art Online games, and I don't think the story in Fatal Bullet is great, but it is entertaining. I actually find myself getting immersed in the game, and strangely the Sword Art Online characters are more interesting to me when I'm seeing them do their stuff as an outsider, and not when I'm actually playing as them. Overall, I'm enjoying the game much more than I did when I was playing it on console, and I already liked it at that point. There's nothing wrong with the console version, I just prefer the keyboard and mouse controls for shooters. And having the game run at a high frame rate is a huge bonus. Well, until the enemy you're fighting charges so far away that it vanishes because it's on 60 FPS, but I'm sure they'll fix that. It's still a fun game, but hopefully they'll prioritize fixing some of the things that are holding it back. Alright, it's worth mentioning that the game apparently uses de novo as well. That's not really something that bothers me personally, but it is something that a lot of people want to know about before they buy a game on the PC. And since I don't think it was announced before the game was released, I thought it would be worth giving anyone that's considering the PC version a heads up. Well, those are my thoughts on my time with the PC version of Fatal Bullet. It's definitely not a great port, but it is more than playable for most people, even if you have to tweak a few settings, or if you just use a controller. So, if you enjoyed this video, then feel free to leave it a like. And if you want to see more of my videos, then subscribe and click that bell. If you want to stay up to date with everything I'm doing, then be sure to follow me on Twitter. And if you want to view my live streams, then follow me on Twitch. The links to everything are in the description. I'll be making some more videos very soon, but until I make those videos, I'll see you all later.